So I'm going to introduce the next segment, which is called Surveying the Landscape of Psychedelic Medicine. Surveying the Landscape. Our first surveyor is Joe Green, who is a co-founder and president of Psychedelic Science. What's happening? What's happening? It's not your turn. Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative. Would you like an A+ hug?
Yeah.
And the other person who's here at the same time, I thought they were going to go sequentially, but it seems like they're together, is Genevieve Jurvetson, who is the chair and founder of Founders Circle, and also, are you the Founders Circle of Psychedelic Science Funders Collective?
It's a lot to say, yeah.
She's the chair, and in the Founders Circle, or perhaps she is the Founders Circle of Psychedelic Science Funders Collective. You're going to hear more about PSFC right now.
Good job, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody. All right, I've got the clicker, got the technology. All right, so I'm Joe Green. This is Genevieve Jurvetson. I'm the co-founder of the Psychedelic Science Funders Collaborative. I also serve on the board of directors of MAPS. I'm thrilled to be joined on stage by Genevieve Jurvetson, who's a very good friend of mine. Really one of the reasons that PSFC exists. She's become a major philanthropist in the field along with her husband and chairs our Founders Circle, which is our group of our largest donors. Thank you, Kevin, I see him down there, for inviting us. Been working professionally on psychedelics for about 4 years, and this is my first time speaking at a psychedelics conference. So thank you for having me. So we want to take a few moments to introduce ourselves. So probably like most of you here, I am here because psychedelics changed my life. For me, it goes back to when I was a very small child. I would wake up from naps in that weird liminal space between consciousness and sleep and be terrified. And as like a 5-year-old, I would contemplate eventual non-existence, which I think is maybe a weird thing to be doing at that age. And for whatever reason, I decided, okay, I must leave my mark on history because I must not be extinguished. So this got me to go, got to change the world. I think I was the one kid at Santa Monica High School who did not do any drugs. I've later found out that everybody was on acid in class, apparently, and I did not know that or even what acid was. I had my first psychedelic experience exactly 10 years ago when I was 28, and I rediscovered wonder. I think I had become so intent on like making my mark that I had forgotten how to just live in the universe. Later on, some folks have told me that this was my Saturn return. I wasn't really into astrology, but you know, I keep crossing new hippie Rubicons as I get more into this movement, so just accept it. Fast forward to 2015, and I found myself on a cruise ship at 1 a.m. with my friend Justin Rosenstein dragging me to a talk by Rick Doblin in the Irish pub on the Lido deck. And I remember hearing him talk about that psychedelics were going to go through the FDA, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I had spent the last 2 years running an immigration reform group and sort of trying to bust through the front gates of Congress, getting through the Senate, almost getting through the House, being rebuffed, and this sounded like, ooh, they're kind of going in the side door. That's clever. And then I showed up at the last psychedelic conference I was at, the Psychedelic Science Conference in 2017 in Oakland, and wandered into this Oakland Marriott, and I was just like, holy crap. This is like this buried treasure. Like, how do I not know about this? Who are all these amazing people and these scientists and these from these amazing institutions? And I was like, I need to help, but I don't know how. I'm not a scientist. And I started meeting some folks. Went to a vegan restaurant with David Bronner, and he told me he was pledging $5 million for MAPS' phase 3. And I was asking where the money was going to come from, and it was clear like nobody really knew. I think at the time there was you could probably count on both hands the number of philanthropists that had ever given $1 million or more to psychedelics. And so myself and Graham Boyd came together to co-found PSFC. We had this first dinner where Bob Jesse was there and David Bronner and Cody Swift, and set out to say, okay, maybe we can raise the money to get at least one psychedelic through phase 3 trials. And so we started organizing salons in San Francisco. Rick Doblin came out, and George Greer and Bob Jesse. And one of the very first people I invited was Genevieve and her husband, Steve.
Thanks, Joe. I'm grateful to be on this journey with you. So as a Southern girl who was raised Mormon by two extremely conservative parents, it's quite a departure from my roots to be speaking about psychedelics in Manhattan. That said, there's nothing I'm more passionate about, and I'm thrilled and humbled to be with all of you today talking about my most favorite topic, psychedelic healing. So before diving into the world of psychedelic science, I was the co-founder and CMO of an AI-enabled company called Fetcher, based here in Manhattan as well. And prior to that, I worked at a handful of startups, and before that, I spent 8 very, very long years in investment banking and investment management, most recently at Goldman Sachs. So in 2018, Joe invited my husband, Steve, who's here with us today, to a dinner, an extraordinary dinner with Michael Pollan and Bob Jesse, where we learned that with only $6 million of additional funding, MAPS could take MDMA to the finish line. Well, that estimate was off by just a little bit, but the team was absolutely right in believing that pushing MDMA to the finish line would likely open up the entire world of psychedelic healing. So that night, Steve and I decided to dig in a really meaningful way and invest, and as a group, we raised the additional funding gap, and we really haven't looked back since. It's not often, as a philanthropist, that you find an area that you can create so much leverage, that has so much impact, and where there's a clear path to success, and where the results of your investment will be known in a relatively short period of time. So we were completely hooked, and I actually must give credit to my husband, Steve, for having the vision at that time, as he often does, to see what an incredible opportunity lie ahead. So today I hope to bring in the voice of the philanthropist to this conversation, and I'm going to make a case for why nonprofits are going to play a really critical role in achieving a future that we can all be proud of. So like many of you, I found myself immersed in this world to try to help find healing for 2 family members. One who suffers from treatment-resistant depression, and another who died last year from a heroin overdose. It still hits hard. I've seen firsthand how these medicines change and transform lives, and I've also seen how we lose lives because we move too slowly. So I'll also make a case today for why we need to move really quickly, while safely and effectively, to try and bring this healing to the world. Thanks. Oh, thank you, Joe.
So it wouldn't be a psychedelic conversation if we didn't talk about intentions. So we have a few intentions for our presentation. First is we want to introduce you to PSFC. We have kind of deliberately stayed pretty behind the scenes, but now that we're moving into a much broader ecosystem around care delivery and interacting with a lot more groups in the ecosystem, we wanted to come say hello. Who are we? What do we do? How do we think about philanthropy? Should you be scared of us? Spoiler, no. Unless you're suffering in trauma, then watch the fuck out. Secondly, we're hoping to help you make sense of the psychedelic landscape and how it fits together in a somewhat coherent whole. I was really honored when Kevin reached out and said he had read our landscape report, which we'd initially put out to our members and some folks in the ecosystem, and said it was the best thing he had read in sort of summarizing the whole landscape. And so we're now putting it out publicly and going to share it with you. And then we also want to tell you how do we think about focus and priorities, and finally, how you can help. So we think of our North Star as fundamentally being making safe, effective, and accessible psychedelic healing available for as many as possible, as soon as possible. We are a small group. We were founded in 2017. We're a 501c3. We have 87 members. We have directly raised $42.4 million for the psychedelic world. That's all philanthropy. Thank you. And over $100 million has been given as well independently by our members. So what do? Our members rely on us to identify, evaluate, and then fundraise for what we think are the priority areas. And we determine that collectively as a group and with our staff. We then support grantees in successfully implementing those priorities. We also connect members around their other priorities, and I think it's important to say the priorities we're going through here are our organizational priorities, but many of our members have other things they're working on that are different, and we all, as a group, support each other in doing that. And we do that, finally, through building a community of donors and helping that group interact with all the amazing people in the psychedelic world. So we have a small but growing team. For the last couple years, it was basically just me and Graham and Ben. Graham and I both do this without being paid by PSFC. I'm also a donor to PSFC and others in the field. I want to particularly highlight, you'll see in purple, the folks that are here. Greg Kearns, our Director of Strategy and Working Groups, and Dr. Alexandra Lehman, who's our Director of Scientific Research and Partnerships. They're both here. If you're in the room, maybe wave for a second. You should definitely say hi to them. They know a lot more than I do.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so last fall when we were completing a fundraising campaign for MAPS, the ecosystem was growing so rapidly that as a funder, our heads were just spinning and we couldn't really make sense of the world. So PSFC had the rather audacious/crazy idea of boiling the entire universe down to one easy-to-read document, and that is the landscape report. And so they set about to do just that with 3 goals in mind. 1, identify and understand the growing number of players both on the for-profit and nonprofit side, understand the relationships and interdependencies these connections would be critical for building out a delivery of care system, and lastly, identifying priority areas for funding. The research process. So they undertook a really rigorous process of both primary and secondary research. On the primary side, they interviewed 59 stakeholders, CEOs, funders, researchers in the field, and then also just did a thorough review of all the literature, current trials, etc. So the report, well, actually, we're excited to share the report with you guys today. So out in the hall, we have hard copies for anyone here of the executive summary of the report. And at the end of this presentation, we're going to share a link so you can download the whole report for free, and it's accessible as soon as we're done. So, thank you. Hope you enjoy it. So the report is broken into 3 distinct sections, and they're in this order intentionally. And each chapter is going to talk about our key recommendations and critical pathways to success. So chapter 1 is focused on expanding legal access to this medicine. Chapter 2 looks at the challenges in bringing both prescription and non-prescription psychedelics to market. And chapter 3 explores a number of areas requiring our support to grow the broader ecosystem. So now we're going to turn our attention to some of the key findings in the report.
And one thing I forgot to say on the team slide is we are hiring. So if you're interested in a job in psychedelics, look at our website. We've got some great roles we're hiring. So step 1 is enabling legal access to psychedelic healing. And this has really been, I would say, the North Star of the movement for decades. This is the story so far. So, since the 1990s, the psychedelic renaissance has really prioritized clinical research as the means to legal access. When I first talked to Rick Dobb, when I first talked to Bob Jesse, that sort of was the key strategy is let's get psychedelic through the FDA, get it rescheduled. And so when we came together in 2017, it seemed that was imminent. And so we started doing due diligence. We had started to raise money, and we're like, holy crap, we should probably actually know if this is a good idea or not. And I have no pharma background, none of us did. And luckily, the right people do seem to show up at the right time. Dr. Jason Pyle showed up, who's here at the conference, who amazingly was between jobs, had been a pharma executive in big pharma, had started biotech companies, was himself a veteran. And when I first called him to talk about this, we were introduced by one of my good friends from college. He said, this is a crazy idea. There's no way this is going to work. This is not worth any of our time. But as he dug in and got to know the team, and MAPS, he's like, this actually might work, but you're going to need more money. Took a little while to kind of get together on what that really meant, but he was right. And that led to the Capstone campaign, which some of you know about from last year, which was a partnership between MAPS, PSFC, and PSFC member Tim Ferriss. Many of the donors to that are in this room. And sort of miraculously, in the middle of the pandemic where we couldn't see anyone in person, we raised the $30 million needed to complete the phase 3 trials. And that was, yeah. So meanwhile, off in Oregon, Tom and Cherie Eckert were cooking up this crazy idea to create regulated access to psilocybin. And I think most of us, including myself, believed that any political movement on psychedelics was pretty far off, that we would need to get something through the FDA, get it rescheduled, get people comfortable with it in the medical system, and then it could maybe move politically. But they were determined. David Bronner believed in them, put in some money, pushed us. Graham started working on the political process. They rewrote the initiative. And as you all know, in November it passed with 56% of the vote, that's
Yay.
amazing. And that was all done for $5.5 million. That was mostly funded by members of PSFC, although through New Approach PAC, not through PSFC, because we're a 501c3. So that leads to 2023, which I believe will be the most important year in the history of psychedelics. So first, the beginning of the year, if everything stays on track, Oregon will start issuing licenses for psilocybin producers, for therapists, and for clinics. And this will be the first legal, regulated psychedelic therapy regime in the history of the world. Like, that is a big fucking deal. Hopefully later that year, MDMA will get approved by the FDA. So we're done, right? Get to go home. So unfortunately, Jason Pyle also keeps teaching us stuff. And the other thing he said to us was, hey, you got to start thinking about this thing called commercialization. We're like, what's that? It turns out if a drug gets approved, it doesn't just show up and start treating people. You actually have to do a bunch of stuff. So luckily, the right people kept showing up at the right time, and I see Dan Grossman down there. And Dan, who's a senior partner at BCG in healthcare, but more importantly, was David Bronner's college roommate. I really encourage you to ask for stories. They're highly entertaining. If you're like, where did David Bronner come from? We also got introduced to a guy named Jeff George, who's been here at the conference, who actually had been the CEO of Sandoz, although much after the invention of LSD. But Rick was really stoked by that. And we formed a commercialization steering committee. That group then hired Joyce Sun Cooper as the head of patient access and commercialization. You're going to get to hear from her a little bit later. And then we gave MAPS funds to hire BCG. They gave us a big fat discount and really mapped out what it would actually take for commercialization. And the TLDR is a lot of money and a lot of work. And luckily, Ryan Zur showed up, and we're doing this regenerative financing to provide the funding for MAPS to actually do that. So here we are at this fork in the road. And if there's one thing that you take away from our talk, it's that it is time for a big pivot. I'm humbly suggesting that we need to dramatically reorient towards care delivery. The philanthropy in the space has almost exclusively been focused on clinical research, and the next wave needs a big chunk for care delivery. I mean, I ask you to think about why you got into this field. Maybe it's healing trauma, changing mental health, doing right by our nation's veterans, shifting consciousness, saving the environment. This is all within reach. But this is where the rubber meets the road or the shit hits the fan. So imagine the best possible version of this. High quality care, it's affordable and accessible, it's available for healing trauma and personal growth. We can have individual and group therapy, it's getting well integrated into society. But also imagine the worst. Unqualified or abusive therapists, badly run clinics, it's only available to the wealthy, and we have a second backlash and shutdown. Both of these are possible, and it really comes down to the next 18 to 24 months of can we actually roll this out into our medical system and into our society. And so that really leads to our key priorities, which is number one, continue to support legal access, MDMA through FDA and psilocybin in Oregon. Like if that, that's not done yet, and if it's not done, then nothing else happens. And then second, and where most of our time and effort is going right now, is to ensure high quality, broadly accessible care delivered both for MDMA for PTSD and psilocybin in Oregon. So now this comes to the second section of our report. We did legal access, and now we're going to get to delivering psychedelic care effectively and equitably. So we're first going to talk about a little bit of what's specific to MAPS and specific to Oregon, and then we're going to talk about what they share in common. So MAPS is the drug sponsor. They are necessarily at the middle of this. They must succeed for anyone else to succeed. And so we've taken this approach of, first and foremost, make sure that MAPS is well-resourced, has a great team, is ready to go, and they're making immense progress, which you're going to get to hear from Joy and Amy about later. So this is a list of just a few of the key things that only MAPS can do. They need to build out a robust provider network. They need doctors, they need therapists, and there's a lot of work we all do with that as well. They have to establish the distribution channels. They have to make the drug. The drug has to get into pharmacy, into formularies, all these crazy drug industry words I'm learning. They have to negotiate with payers, insurance companies, the government. And they're working to identify options for patient assistance. One of the great things about them being a nonprofit is they can channel a lot of their profits back into making sure that, not just in the United States, but around the world, that those who need this can get the medicine. And then Oregon, and I really, really, really want to emphasize, I don't think enough attention is being paid to Oregon. This is the first access to psilocybin. I think a lot of us thought FDA would be the first access to psilocybin. It turns out it's going to be in Oregon. If you care about psilocybin, if you care about classic psychedelics, you should care about Oregon. I was having dinner with Bill and Brian Richards the other night, and I was like, what are you guys doing in Oregon? They're like, nothing. I was like, maybe you should be. They're like, maybe we should be. It's the first legal opportunity to assist clients without a mental health diagnosis. That means for personal and spiritual growth. So much work is done with psilocybin for end of life. You could go do hospice for end of life in Oregon in a year and a half. I also think Oregon can be a key hub for research and training. The Cohen Foundation, that's part of PSFC, is funding Chris Stauffer, who's at OHSU and the Portland VA, to do a group therapy study. Our hope is that researchers around the country and around the world who are experienced can support researchers in Oregon, or maybe move to Oregon. It's a pretty nice place, especially if you live on the East Coast. What a terrible idea.
Oh.
You have to, and secondly is for training, and we're going to talk more about this, but the most important thing for training is people getting experience, and you're going to be able to get experience in Oregon. And it's a testing ground for care delivery models. It's going to enable individual therapy, group therapy. I'm hoping that I can go to a Yom Kippur psilocybin retreat. That I think can happen soon. And by the way, happy Hanukkah.
Awesome. So Joe talked a lot about what's unique about the MDMA rollout in Oregon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the shared challenges. And I think it's important that we note that these challenges need to be faced by the entire ecosystem and everyone in this community, not just by MAPS. So we need solutions to drive safety and efficacy. We need solutions to ensure that we have enough therapists that have been properly trained. We need solutions to ensure equitable and affordable access to all who need this type of healing. And our hope at PSFC is that we can all work together so that we're not answering all these problems or answering these questions in silos.
Okay. So the first part of safety and efficacy is standards of care. So we need to establish clear standards for safe and ethical conduct. One of the ways this is going to happen is the American Psychedelic Practitioners Association, which is in the process of forming. PSFC is providing both financial and expertise support. Standards will inform things like training curricula and reimbursement models. Side by side with that is the creation, is the creation of a board of psychedelic medicine and therapies. So this will be the group that administers the exam to certify practitioners. That enables insurance credentialing, it enables state licensing boards, and a mechanism to redress misconduct. If you have a license you can lose. And I want to say this is mirroring how the standard medical model works. Across the whole medical system, you have a professional association and you have a certification board, and we're working to mirror that in in psychedelics. This is something that really can only be done philanthropically, and it has to be ecosystem-wide. And then we need to do treatment optimization research. So most of the research so far has been new molecules, how does the brain work, but we need to do the applied research as well to improve safety, efficacy, and accessibility. Just a few things, in that category are how well does group therapy work? Can that drive down costs and potentially even improve outcomes? How do existing protocols work for minority groups? And what types of practitioners are actually effective? I mean, we know we're going to need a lot of practitioners. Maybe a meditation teacher would be a great psychedelic therapist. Maybe a holotropic breath worker. We want to understand who actually does this job well so that we can meet what's just an enormous need.
Thanks. So BCG did an analysis where they determined that in order to treat 1 million patients annually by 2031, we're going to need 55,000 to 100,000 trained therapists. And to put that number in perspective, that's about 15% of the US mental health workforce. Okay, so in order to train up all these folks, we're going to need to scale up the training programs, establish scholarship programs so that these trainings are accessible to people, and support the practitioners who want to transition their private practice to include psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So the training ecosystem is made up of a growing number of players. We have academic institutions like CIIS, you have drug sponsors like USONA and MAPS and Compass, and you also have private and nonprofit organizations like Sage Influence. So we still have a ton of challenges left to solve, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them. We currently have no agreement on what is the core curriculum. Can you guys still hear me? Oh, perfect. Oh, closer in. Is this better? There we go. No, okay. Assurances that programs will prepare practitioners to work with a specific medicine. So if you're not going through a training program that's sponsored by one of the drug sponsors, as a therapist, how do you know when these drugs come to market that you'll actually be certified to practice in them, let alone the whole host of other molecules that we hope will come to market pretty soon? And lastly, supervision is really it's a huge bottleneck in the system. So following the completion of a training program, you need to be supervised, and particularly if you're wanting to work with MDMA as a medicine, there just really aren't any slots in the phase 3 clinical trials for you to put your learnings into action. Okay, so recognizing that the expenses of these training programs might be cost prohibitive, we think as funders, this is what we can do. We can help sponsor these scholarships so that we can ensure that we have just a large and diverse cohort of therapists who can treat underserved populations. Okay, so I recently completed the MAPS MDMA therapist training, which was an extraordinary experience, but what became really just eye-opening for me was all the challenges that a therapist is faced with when they actually want to put their learnings into action and open up a practice. So I'm going to walk you through just a couple of the challenges that we see. So they'd come to us with questions like, where are they going to practice? Like physically, where are they going to practice? Who will be prescribing the medicine for them? How many medicine sessions will they do a month? And how much will they charge? And the questions go on. And we see that there's kind of two ways as funders we can help support this. One by providing additional training in the actual business of working in psychedelic medicine. And two, helping them with the startup costs of opening a clinic so that they can scale up more quickly and treat more patients.
So the third section of care delivery is accessibility and affordability. So first is cost-effectiveness research. For payers to make the decision to cover, they have to know that this is cost-effective and potentially even cost-saving, which luckily the initial work shows that MDMA therapy is going to be both cost-effective and cost-saving. We also have to compare psychedelic-assisted therapy with existing treatments to show, which is not what you do in the FDA trials, but to show that it's better, more cost-effective, more effective, more efficient, more efficacious. Next is patient assistance funds. The biggest way, of course, to make access happen in the United States is going to be insurance coverage. But we also need to make sure that people who are uninsured have access. And it's complicated because there's the drug and there's the therapy cost. So philanthropic support is going to be important to bridge access to treatment. This is especially true in Oregon, where it's unlikely, at least initially, that insurance is going to cover something that's federally illegal. So one really important thing is patient access pilots, especially with government payers. And we want to focus particularly on some work we're doing with the Veterans Administration.
Thanks. So veterans are near and dear to my heart, and I want to give a special shout out to two organizations who are here today, Vets and Heroic Hearts. I'd encourage you to reach out to their founders and hear more about how they're helping veterans find psychedelic healing, often having to send them out of the country to get these kinds of treatments. And while I applaud the founders of these organizations for their bravery, it really saddens me to think that we have to send our vets out of the country to get this therapy to treat the trauma for defending us.
It's shameful.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So last night, my friend Jason Pyle said something that just really captured my sentiments so beautifully. Until we have the wisdom to end war, we have a moral obligation to help the people that we send to war. That's so perfect. And as, I think these statistics speak for themselves. We are failing our veterans, and we must do better.
So we have a Veterans Affairs strategy, and the VA really is like the center of what's important in order to get MDMA therapy adopted more broadly. So you have, of course, 1 million patients in need that we really have an obligation to, as Genevieve so beautifully said. They're also a fully integrated payer and provider, so it is in their direct financial interest. They will save a lot of money by actually being able to cure PTSD instead of just dealing with symptoms. Third is that, so when you roll out a new drug, you want to go to centers of excellence. So if you roll out an oncology drug, you go to somewhere like Sloan Kettering and have them pilot it. Well, the center of excellence for PTSD is the National Center for PTSD, which is created by the Senate and part of the VA. And so how do we do this? How do we get the VA to adopt it? Well, FDA approval is necessary, but it's not sufficient. They need to do extensive research within the VA system on their patients with their therapists. Some of this research is starting, such as here at the Bronx VA, at the Portland VA, and Loma Linda. And we have been funding and will continue to fund this research addenda to make sure that if the VA adopts, every other payer is going to follow. And the VA doesn't adopt, the other payers are going to be like, wait, why is the organization that has the most expertise on PTSD not adopting it? Maybe we don't need to.
So unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do a deep dive on the ecosystem, but I encourage you to look to Chapter 3 of our landscape report, which includes recommendations for all of the following bullet points. And on the last point here, supporting indigenous-led plant medicine conservation efforts, I want to just tip our hats to a few PSFC members, Bob Jesse and David Bronner and the folks at River Styx and Tim Ferriss, who are all doing just incredible work to kind of move forward this ecosystem with an eye towards conservation.
All right, so wrapping up. So that's our view of the rapidly evolving psychedelic landscape. It's complicated. That's just the tip of the iceberg, but we hope that it's helpful, and really do encourage you to read the report, which you can download at this link here. This is going to take the work of a very broad group of stakeholders, and I want to sort of come back to what I think is the most important point here, which is the next 2 years is all about care delivery. You know, it's great that we're doing research. It's great that there's psychedelic centers popping up, seems like every month. But if we don't get care delivery right, none of this other stuff is going to matter. And there really is a pretty high variance between the good version of this and the bad version of this. I encourage, like, any of you that are interested, go to Oregon, start a clinic there, do research there. And we hope that we together can make psychedelics, the promise of psychedelics, actually become reality. Thank you. So whether you're a researcher, a drug sponsor, academic institution practitioner, clinic operator, or funder, hope everyone will find a role for themselves in this. So thank you to Kevin, thank you to the Horizons team. It's been such an honor to be here. This is how you find us, website. You can find the report. We'll be here today, tomorrow. Come find us. A number of our funders are here. Our staff is here. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll grab this water. Thank you.
I want to thank Joe Green and Genevieve Jurvetson from PSFC. If anybody has a quick question, we hope to have a quick answer. I said quick twice. Go right ahead.
Let's move over so we
Okay.
can see the,
There it is.
see the
Okay,
questioners.
perfect. Hi, thank you for your comments today. We heard a lot about the conference about diversity and equity, and I'm wondering, how are you, given that money is power, how are you giving women, people of color, indigenous people a seat at the table of your funding decisions for your projects?
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, I mean, our funding decision-making process involves talking to as many stakeholders as we can. Our members have funded a number of different equity programs. As just a personal story to share, I posted on Facebook about 2 years ago something about MAPS, and a guy named Joseph McCowan, who I think is here, who I went to kindergarten through 12th grade with, but I hadn't really spoken to since high school. He's like, oh, I just went through this training in Louisville, which was a therapist of color training, which PSFC and a number of our members had sponsored. And we were never really that close in kindergarten through 12th grade. And then he ended up coming over to my house, I think like literally the first weekend of lockdown. And we've become incredible friends since. He's, I think, the only African-American phase 3 therapist in the MDMA trials, and we obviously want to have a lot more of that. And so, we're doing our best to fund programs around diversity, making sure we have diverse therapists, which then, and making sure we are treating a diverse population. And I mean, first and foremost, getting coverage by payers, by the VA system is the most important thing, and making sure that everybody who needs this treatment can get it.
So how many Indigenous elders, though, do you actually have on your advisory board?
Oh, great question.
And I respect the work that you do so much. I really do. And I appreciate you mentioning River Styx, and I just really want to encourage us to not have it be an afterthought, And really my actual question was, yeah, and I do have so much respect, and thank you for all the work that you do. For the people who follow more traditional types of practice, who don't necessarily want to go the medical route, do you encourage people to come forward and get certified and go through more, conventional models of training? Are they going to get more like edged out and stay underground? What's your recommendation on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Oregon particularly provides a huge opportunity because it is a non-medical model. I think and again, there's Tom and Angie are both going to speak later about a lot more details with Oregon, but group work will be allowed. You're allowed to do work that's not medical, that's spiritual. So there's no reason that I know that any number of indigenous modalities using psilocybin, you'd have to use psilocybin, would be available in Oregon. And then secondly, I do encourage people to, get certified. Even within, the MAPS training, having that training, there's a lot of flexibility beyond that in how people deliver the care. I mean, there's certain things they have to do, but there's a lot they can do beyond that. And just, on your first point, we do take seriously, diverse representation. And look, the reality of America is that a lot of the people with money look like us. And what we have done is gathered together a lot of people with money to try to move this movement forward. And we really rely on our members. David Bronner and River Styx are incredibly active members of our group. They have gotten many of our other donors to donate to the indigenous conservation efforts. And we are in the process of trying to more formally build out our advisory board. And we've been a very small, very informal group for the last few years. And now that we're kind of taking on more, we are working to, formalize more advisors from a whole variety of stakeholders in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we just have time for one more question, I believe. And also, are we doing a little break after this, or are we going straight to the next one? No break. Keep going. Okay.
No break.
Quick question.
No rest for the weary.
Hey, thanks so much for that. My name's Catherine Tucker. I'm with Emerge Law Group. My question is whether you're aware of access to MDMA as an eligible investigational drug under right to try, because I know Nicole mentioned access to psilocybin, but your discussion had a lot to do with access for veterans and MDMA. And what about your thinking on right to try? Because of course it's also accessible.
Yeah, I mean, so there's these two kind of similar things, which is expanded access and right to try. So MAPS is putting out an expanded access program, which is technically still a clinical trial, but will enable people who are not part of phase 3 to have treatment. We are putting a lot of effort into making sure that a lot of veterans, as well as other underserved populations, get into that. Right to try is slightly different, and most drug companies have stayed away from that because, frankly, there's not a lot of control over it, and so the oversight of safety, I think, and again, this is not my expertise, I would ask Amy Emerson or other folks from MAPS that question later, but that's my understanding.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You guys,
Thank you.
great job.